The design is that men would be protectors, that men would be leaders, that men would be providers.
Biblical motto of manhood that we see is strength under control.
This is the physical manifestation of a spiritual war to undermine what God has created. Hello and welcome to another episode of the March or Die Show. This is the show where we provide both perspective and principles for you to march when it would be easier to stay where you are and die. My name is Jeremy Stalnecker, here with Sean Kennard. Sean titled this one, The War on Masculinity.
Yes.
The War on Masculinity. And that sounds a bit hyperbolic, like dramatic, but it's not. There is a war on masculinity. Certainly there is a war on men. You say, how do you know that? Well, if you go all the way back to the Old Testament book of Genesis, that's the first one. Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we see creation take place as well as the creation of the first man, that is Adam, and bringing to Adam the first woman, Eve, created out of her. And you know that story from Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Then sin enters the world in Genesis chapter 3. A lot happens there. We don't need to go back over that. But in Genesis chapter 3, really verses 13, 14, 15, that passage there toward the end of Genesis chapter 3, God talks about this. He talks about this war on masculinity and how there would be forces at work that would seek to tear down the role of men, to usurp the role and responsibility that men have been given by God. We can follow that all the way through the Old Testament into the New Testament. And when instruction is given on men's role in the marriage and the wife's role in the marriage, we see that the natural order, the order that God has established, is that men would lead and hold the responsibility for the relationship of the marriage and the family. And that's a very high calling. It's a calling to be responsible, to stand up, to lead, to protect, to provide, to do those things. And yet we're living at a moment where even the idea of a man standing up and leading and providing and protecting and being responsible is being torn down by our culture. And there really is a war, in a lot of ways, a very spiritual war, but also a culture war against men being what God has created and called them to be. And we need to continue to talk about this because I think we forget that it's happening. It's just such a normal part of the dialogue in the world in which we live. But we need to continue to talk about it, to understand it, to recognize the actual impact it has on men, on women, on families, on culture, and then what we can do about it. So excited to talk about this again. Excited, not happy, but thankful for the opportunity to bring this to you again. And hopefully this is a thought-provoking episode for you. So that was a lot, but there you go.
It's good. I mean, I to your point, I think it's important to remember what we're talking about here is this is real. This is not some thought that we've generated. This is real. We've seen it. If you're in a man and you're in a position of leadership or you're trying to be in a position of leadership, you've seen this, felt it some way. So yeah, I think talking about, where this comes from, how it affects us, and more importantly, how to fight back is kind of what we want to do in the show today. This is not just a cultural thing. We need to remember that this is a strategic attack by the enemy on God's design. We're not talking about culturally, suppressing men, although that's how the enemy uses this tactic. At the roots of it is a strategic planned attack from the enemy. We've kind of seen this play out over the years, where men are kind of told to sit down and shut up, honestly, about a lot of topics. So you can't speak about that. You don't have, the authority, or you can't identify with this group, whatever the case may be, right? We hear this toxic masculinity a lot. And we've talked about this in other podcasts with guests and stuff. And masculinity in itself is not toxic. We see examples of toxic masculinity. And I would say that's more accurately identified as what I would call sinful masculinity. Masculinity without humility. I think that's the problem that we see in today's world. Because the biblical motto of manhood that we see is strength under control. It's not domination. It's not tyranny. It is strength under control. I mean, Jordan Peterson's kind of been famous for this, for a lot of things, but this whole men should be dangerous quote, right? And the idea stems from that men should be dangerous because they should be able to hold evil accountable. Because without that ability, then you can't do that. You're not courageous. You're not strong. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about what we would consider dangerous in today's time, or that word dangerous is probably more referring to a skill set. Like, can you hurt somebody with your bare hands? Can you lift a lot of weight?
Right.
That's not, sure. I personally, I think that men should also have that skill set.
Sure.
But, wisdom is dangerous. Knowledge is dangerous. Compassion is dangerous. Love is dangerous. These things are dangerous because, one of the most dangerous people on the earth is a man who loves so deeply that he's willing to stand for truth.
Right.
And I think that that's what we're talking about today. Because when culture confuses, that masculinity, and takes it to the extreme level of some of what we've seen, then, everything starts to kind of crumble. And so, I think it's a good thing to talk about. I don't think it's something that we can talk about too much.
Let's start with what we mean by, war on masculinity. And again, a lot of other people have talked about this. We're certainly not the first ones. This has been a conversation that's been happening, I would imagine, for generations in different circles, but for the last, 10 years, I don't know what the exact time frame has been. This has been a real conversation that a lot of people have had, and we blame everything on social media. But I think social media has definitely spun this up into kind of a mainstream conversation. I think questions like, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a biblical man or a biblical father or husband? These are conversations that have happened in a lot of places. But the idea that it is, an actual attack on masculinity very broadly is relatively, I think, kind of new. I mean, there's always been an underlying attack, but where it's popular to tear down what people call the patriarchy, right? This order in the home, where it's almost offensive for a man to stand up and say, I'm going to lead, or I'm going to, do this or that. So when we talk about this war on masculinity, let's talk first about that. Where, what do we mean by war on masculinity? Why is that the phrase that we've chosen to use?
Yeah, I think, kind of I mentioned earlier, but I'll expand on it. I think it is specifically a strategic attack by the enemy. Yeah. Because I think the enemy knows that if he attacks masculinity, then he can attack the image of men as a Christ-bearing image. Yeah. And I think that would be one of his most masterful plans, right? Right. I mean, when men stop leading, families fall apart. I mean, I've seen this. I've talked about this a lot in law enforcement. Man, every young kid that I dealt with that was out running the streets didn't have a dad at home. And I mean, I've just seen it over and over again. And we can everything when there's a fatherless home, every possible negative statistic increases. Your chances of being incarcerated shoot through the roof. Your chances of being addicted to drugs shoot through the roof. Your chances of suffering from mental illness shoot through the roof. They all happen. Right. So when men stop leading, families fall apart. When men stop protecting, then the vulnerable suffer. I think about, and this is an extreme example, but it's close to home for me, so I'll use it. People can think of their own example, but an active shooter walks into a building and starts shooting. Well, where are the men that are attacking this shooter? Where are the strong men that have the skill set, the courage, and the loving compassion to do violent things in order to protect the vulnerable and innocent? We need those men out there that are willing to do that. Otherwise, enemy runs rampant. And all that really is just to highlight that I think that the enemy's one of his most masterful plans is if he can tear down the image of man, then he can tear down the image of Christ. And that's what he wants to do.
Yeah, that's good. And it's important to understand, I think, where you and I are coming from on this, right? Because a lot of people talk about this from perhaps different worldviews. And the place that is the starting point for us is asking the question, what is God's design for men? What is God's design for women? What is God's design for leadership in culture and leadership in the home? And when we look to Scripture, when we look to the Bible, and again, we could spend hours kind of breaking this down. But when we look to God's design, the design is that men would be protectors, that men would be leaders, that men would be providers, that men would do the hard work of serving both their wife and their family and those more broadly in culture, that men would stand up and lead. And this was not something that was argued against until fairly recently.
Yeah.
But when we talk about masculinity, we talk about the roles of men and women, we're looking at it from a biblical worldview. What did God design? What did God create? And so to that, none of this is about importance or value. And I think, again, this is it's important to say this because I read the comments on our videos, but also because I've heard other people who rail against some of these conversations and say, well, what you're saying is that women are unimportant, or you give statistics about fatherless homes. And what you're saying is that single moms, we're not saying any of those things, but you cannot argue the point that statistically, homes without fathers are much more likely to have problems and all the things that you just outlined. There are wonderful single moms that are struggling to get by, that did nothing to put themselves in that position, that are sacrificing for their kids, that raise good kids. But those are statistically and culturally the exception. Yeah. Those certainly happen. None of this is to say that, that doesn't happen. It's also not to say that there aren't strong women who wouldn't respond to an active shooter in a school, right? We're not saying any of those things. That there are. We're both married to strong women. Yes. We both have strong women in our lives. I always joke that obviously have a wife. I have 2 daughters. I have a daughter-in-law. I have a granddaughter, and they're all strong women, right? Like, I'm not against it. In fact, I want them to be strong, and I want them to be able to hold their own. This is not about that. This is understanding that if we look at the world from God's perspective, as we should, that's a biblical perspective, and we understand how God created us, then when things are working well, it's because we're doing them according to their design.
Yeah.
And the design was given to us by the designer, by the creator God. And as he lined these roles out and these responsibilities out, that is the way that things work well. And that's why we see fatherless homes struggle, and cultures, environments where there are a large number of fatherless homes and men who won't lead, they struggle. That is just real, and it's real not because of some kind of weird cultural demographic, but because God created us to function in a very specific way. And if we don't, there will be problems. So, then that goes back to, why is there a war? Why do we call it a war? Because the devil understands the design. Mm-hmm. He understands the creation, and he will do absolutely everything that he can to destroy that. That's what Genesis 3 is all about. Why did he tempt a woman who then went to her husband, who didn't lead, who didn't stop what was happening? That's what happened in Genesis 3. Yeah. Why? Because the devil understands the natural order given by God and attacked not Eve. Really, he was attacking the leadership of Adam. And again, we see that throughout, and the problems that occur when men won't stand up and lead. So there is a real war. It's a spiritual war to undermine the natural order as God has given. And that spiritual war then is reflected, I think, in the cultural war that we currently see in front of us. And when you see, folks screaming about toxic masculinity and, all these gender roles and all this stuff that we hear them screaming about, just understand that is the natural end of the spiritual war. This is the physical manifestation of a spiritual war to undermine what God has created.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because that's 100% true. And I have ran into those kids who were in a fatherless home. That mother was was doing everything they could, and the kid was making it. He was struggling and he had hardships, but he was making it. So I'm not sitting here again saying women can't also be protectors and providers and leaders in their own right. They absolutely can. I mean, my wife she deadlifts more than most men. She's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. She can shoot, really, really well. So she would be that woman that would attack the active shooter in my absence, right? But she also understands that that I being there, that I would take that role, and she would get our kids out of the building, right? There's a whole process to the design, and I would argue that kids that grew up in a home with an absent mother would also be struggling with a lot of things.
Of course.
Sadly, for whatever reason, because the enemy's attack is on the leadership of God's design, which has been identified as a man, which is a responsibility, not, like you said, not an elevation of
it's not a value statement.
It's not a value statement, right? But sadly, what we see almost a really high percentage, I won't throw it out there because I don't know it, but it's a very high percentage. When it's a broken home, it's the man that leaves the family. It's not often the woman. It does happen. I know examples of it. I know personal friends that has happened to, but most of the time it is the man that leaves the home. And again, I think it's a corruption. It's a masterful plan of corruption. I have Ezekiel 22:30 in my head. I look for a man among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap, but I found none, because the men were so corrupted that they could not stand up. And to me, it is a masterful plan of corruption. Yeah. For the enemy's goal is to corrupt man and culture, in the home, in business, right? In every aspect, because if he can do that, then he can break down every part of God's design.
That's good. And a big part of this conversation is understanding that ultimately men in the home, for sure, will answer to God for how that home is managed, administrated, run. Yeah. And men and women have different roles, but they also have different, skills and bring different things into a relationship. And if, one is stronger in one area than another, that's wonderful. God uses both, but the ultimate responsibility for whether or not that relationship or that home honors God and lives in a way that reflects, God and his goodness and his grace, that falls to the husband and to the man in that relationship. And, you follow that out. It is the man's responsibility in culture to stand up, to lead well, to protect, to serve, and to do all of those things. And so, there's absolutely a war. And again, I think this is something that we know it's gone on since the very beginning. Yeah. But it's like it's become a pitched battle, right? You have this almost Cold War that has been going on forever. Well, now it's been brought into the mainstream. And so there's a response to that. And this is where I think the idea of toxic masculinity has come from. The response to this war that's been going on is, there are two responses, right? There's two kind of extremes to this. There is the far extreme of, men are superior, they are stronger, they're more capable. And because of that, we just need to seize back control, right? We've got this thing happening against men, and men are being, told that they're worthless and that they can't really accomplish anything. So men need to stand up. We are stronger and we are more capable and we can make more money and we can do all this stuff. And so let's do it, right? Like that's the toxic masculinity thing. To me, when I think about toxic masculinity, what I think about, what makes it toxic is that it is a masculinity, it's a strength, if you will, that a bully would have. It's a bullying your way into whatever situation or relationship you can to receive something personal. Yeah. It's you getting what you want because you can take it. That is this idea of toxic masculinity in my mind. Now, words are used and a lot of other things are used to gain that, but it's this, I'm going to do whatever I can and whatever I want because I can. Well, that's not biblical masculinity. Biblical masculinity is I'm going to use my strength and my opportunities and my roles to serve others.
Yeah.
And so this idea that I'm going to use what I have, whether it's physical strength or some network or cultural ability, I'm going to use that for my personal gain. That's the toxic masculinity, I think, that people are pushing against. It's not men being men. It shouldn't be. It's men using people to get what they want. That's the one extreme. And then the other extreme is just men rolling over and going, look, I'm not down for this fight. I'm going to go to work, do what I need to do, and then play video games. That's kind of the other extreme. Yeah,
it's the passive, right? And we've already highlighted the abandon, right? Like you abandoning. We know that's an issue. The other issue is maybe you're around, but you're not present. You're passive. You know, you're not leading. You're not stepping into those roles in any way, shape, or form, and that's, I think, equally as dangerous. And it's easy to fall into that trap of, again, like you said, okay, I'm working, I'm putting my head down, I come home, I'm tired. I'm like, I don't want to parent my children. I don't want to play with my children. I don't want to teach them anything because I'm tired. And, when you get home from work, so you got home from work, like your job, your profession, your work is not over.
Right.
Your work as a father, as a husband, being present for your wife, they're not over. And these are things that I struggle with. I'm not, like I often say, I'm not up here saying that, I'm perfect at these things, but it warrants having conversations around it so that we can prepare together. So what would you say, Jeremy, to somebody who's like, okay, well, what do I do then?
Yeah.
How do I fight back? How can I stand in the gap?
Yeah, I think the simplest answer to that question, and that's the right question. I think the simplest answer to that question is take responsibility. Take responsibility. Well, in order to take responsibility, I would have to ask the question, responsibility for what? What is my responsibility? So this requires going to Scripture and understanding what God wants us to do and what God has called us to do and what God has created us to do. And there are so many different contexts to see this in. As we work through the New Testament, there are many, many passages on the roles of men and the roles of women. We go to Ephesians chapter 5, and that really breaks down. This is, a lot of people use this for marriage. Ephesians chapter 5 certainly speaks to marriage, but it speaks to roles and responsibilities. But in that tells husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. It's a sacrificial attitude. And I always run from there to Philippians chapter 2 that talks about how Jesus, God, humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. He did what we needed him to do. He's God, so has absolute strength. He's God, so he absolutely can do whatever he wants to. He is right as God. He is truth as God. And he made the decision to humble himself for the good of those that he leads. And as men, we need to be responsible for that. So it's saying, all right, I am going to take responsibility for what God has given to me, the role that he's set in front of me as a man. And then understanding that the role of a man is to sacrificially lead. Okay. And again, we got to be really careful about this. This doesn't mean sacrificially lay down or roll over. It is doing what is best for those that we lead. Yeah. And, a simple example in a home context, not everyone in your home is always going to be happy about what they need to do. Your wife, your kids, your family, they need to go to church. They need to spend time, doing the things that God has called us to do as a family unit, to learn about him and to grow in that relationship. And it's your responsibility as a husband to lead that. Yeah. And 1,000 other examples. It's the understanding that life is not about me. It's not me leveraging what I have to get what I want. It's me leveraging what I have as God directs and gives wisdom to serve those in my life, to do the hard work, to do the hard things. And it's important to note, I think, that this is not necessarily about, physical prowess or doing hard things physically. A lot of people do. I'm for it. I think it's important. I think it builds a resilience in us that extends into other areas. But man, there are a lot of guys who are strong leaders in their homes and take responsibility and do the hard work that would never show up in a gym or some other like physically difficult context, but they've decided to lead. And so it really is that. It's accepting responsibility, my God-given responsibility as a man, and to the extent that he allows me, leading by serving others. I think it's that simple. This is what keeps men from walking away when things get hard in a relationship. This is what keeps men from playing video games when they get home from work, when their wife needs them, to do something else, or their kids need them to be present with them. This is what causes a man to work so that he can provide. It's all of those things. It's understanding I have a responsibility, not only to these people that God has put in my life, but to him, and I'll give an account for that. So that's the starting point. And to me, that pushes away both sides of the extreme of passive masculinity or this idea of toxic masculinity.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think taking responsibility is absolutely number one. Understand what that responsibility is. We've highlighted that in today. Standing for truth, which means you have to know truth. So you have to be in God's word.
That's right.
Be in God's word every single day. Without compromise. Don't compromise to fit in. I see that in today's culture. Like, everybody from work is going to this, place that probably shouldn't go to as a married man.
Right.
And I'm not even talking about something like a strip club. I'm just talking about like Hooters. Bro, don't go to Hooters. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Just start analyzing your actions and the actions of the people around you. And that kind of leads me to the thought of, we talk about a lot in what we do here at Mighty Oaks is build a brotherhood,
that's good.
Build a brotherhood of men who are seeking the same goals as you. That's extremely important. Surround yourself with godly men. Yeah. We say it a lot, Proverbs, iron sharpens iron, but it's true. I mean, what's the other saying? You're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's true. I don't think that's just a catchy saying. I think that's absolutely true. In my own personal life, I can look at times in my life, the people I spent time around definitely reflected my character. And as I started to change those people, then my character started to change, started to reflect, the people that I spend my time around. So change your playmates and change your playground. I always say, hey, man, you want to change something, change your playmates and change your playground.
Yeah, that's good.
Change the people you spend time with and change the places you spend time at. And just be grounded in truth,
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. You just have to be present in the whatever responsibility, whatever leadership capacity you have put yourself in or you've found yourself in. If you've married a woman, then be present as a husband. If you've fathered children, if you've created children, then be present as a father. If you've accepted a role at work, then be present in that role. If you've set a goal for your life or something you're trying to pursue, then be present in the actions that you need to take to achieve that goal.
Yeah,
I think if we do that as men, then we'll start to turn the tide a little bit.
I think along with all of that, you have to start where you are. If, we do have so many young men that are growing up in homes where they don't have an effective male influence, right? And so they don't have someone to show them the way. And so maybe they come to this later in life and they go, man, I didn't know how to do this. I want to do this. Start where you are. Yeah. Maybe you're a little further down the road and you've messed this up in some areas. Apologize to the people you've hurt or apologize to the people you haven't led the way you should have, and start where you are. And again, connecting into a group of people's mentors, counselors can be very, very helpful with this to really line out, where do I go from here? How do I begin to do this? Where do I start? What books do I read? What conversations do I have? Am I married? What does that look like in this relationship that I've had, but haven't really understood well? How do I lead my wife? And how do we get on the same page and all of this? And, maybe I'm single. Okay, well, what does that look like? What does that type of leadership look like in this culture? Start where you are, apologize if you need to apologize, and then start moving forward. Get the right people in your life, get counsel, get help, And God honors that, man. And I think we forget that, right? This is not some tactic of manipulation. And I go back to that again and again and again, because it's not.
Yeah.
It is a responsibility that God has placed on us. And you can fight against it or say it's not true or say it's old fashioned or it's outdated or not culturally relevant. Look, and I say this as honestly as I can. My wife is a better leader than me. She's smarter than me. And I don't mean that like she's smart. No, it's like her IQ is higher than mine.
Yeah.
Given the right tools and opportunities, she can lead better than me. She's amazing, but God has called me to be responsible for what happens in our marriage. And so, that takes work with both of us and understanding our different roles and how her skills and talents and opportunities and mine come together and all that, right? But I have a responsibility given to me by God. It's not about manipulation or getting what I want. It really is about leading and standing up and doing the right thing for the right reasons. And I think a lot of this kind of war on masculinity thing is disingenuous too, because there are a lot of very strong men who love people and are putting their lives on the line to serve people. We see this in the first responder community. We certainly see this in, military contexts, but we just see it in communities. When you see stuff go sideways in a community, right? Maybe there's a storm that floods streets or causes people to get stranded somewhere, or something crazy happens. Man, you always see the images of these men just standing up and saying, all right, well, I'm going to go take care of that because somebody needs to. I think a lot of this war on masculinity is disingenuous. I don't think it's real. I think it's just, I think it's real, but I think it's real to get what they want, right? Yeah. It's not really a railing against strong men or strength. Yeah. It's a railing against, well, don't tell me what to believe. But man, at the end of the day, particularly if you're a Christian, you should understand, there will be a time when I will give an account for whether or not I fulfilled the purpose that God placed in me and on me. And man, that's a serious thing. It's a heavy thing. And the only time homes and societies and cultures and neighborhoods and churches and the rest of it work is when we're doing it God's way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. The last thing I'll kind of add, and just kind of thought about it whenever you were talking, is to not be discouraged, right? To take hope. And what I mean by that is you're gonna not do it right. You're not gonna do it perfect. But don't let that discourage you. Failure is not the opposite of success. I've said this before. Failure is a part of success. It is a part of succeeding if you have the right mindset. So you get home and, you're short with your wife. She asks you to do something or whatever, and you get mad about it. Well, reflect on that and do it better next time. You raise your voice at your children. Well, reflect on that and do it better next time. You shove off responsibility at work. Well, reflect on that and do it better next time. Don't allow the failure to become your habit.
Yeah.
And we see this a lot in other capacities, right? I see this a lot in the fitness world. So I'm in the fitness world a lot, train people in mixed martial arts and nutrition. And, people will be doing really, really good, and they'll have like one blowout day where they just eat whatever they want and they quit. They're like, whatever, I've ruined it. I'm done. And so you're going to be imperfect because of the fall of man, which we've talked about in this episode. But you also have the Savior on your side. You have the hope of Christ. You have victory, which is already yours because of the gift that Christ gave us on the cross. So you're going to fail. Seek forgiveness, right? Apologize, like you've already highlighted. Apologize where apology needs to be said. Model that, because that's an amazing model to be as a man. What if you grow up with a man that apologized for his wrongs? I mean, that's pretty unheard of today's times. So seek forgiveness, apologize, and then do it better the next time. Create a plan of action, right? We talk about this a lot. Strategy, write it down. Create a plan of action, and then hold yourself accountable to that plan of action.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I hope that this conversation is an encouraging conversation. This is not intended to be the yell at guys for doing wrong.
Yeah.
because, we both do our best to lead our homes and our, in our lives. And man, I fail at this all the time. And I'm super blessed. I understand this. I had a strong dad who understood leadership and who spent time training me in that, discipling me in that, and provided a great example and continues to do that. So I am unique in that regard, and I understand that. And it's still really, really hard. And so this is not intended to be like, hey, do better. It's just intended to be like, look, guys, I know what the world says. I know what the people around us say. But you have been called to more than that. And life changes, and it's amazing what can happen when we lean into what God created us to be. And so I hope this is an encouraging conversation for those who are hearing it. And I think we know this, but sometimes we need to have somebody pull us aside and go, hey, it's okay. It's okay to be what God created you to be. Do that. And hopefully this goes toward encouraging that way. Yeah,
I agree. I hope if you've listened this far and you've been watching the show, I hope you hear a posture of encouragement from that's what this show is for. It's not to beat guys down. Sometimes I think we need to say, hey guys, let's do better here.
Yeah.
But this is a posture of encouragement, because honestly, just like you said, man, I fail at this all the time, and I have to look at ways how I can do it better, all the time. Absolutely. I agree with that.
It's good. Well, I hope this, hope this will help to you and encouragement to you. Share it out, send it to somebody that would be encouraged or helped by it. And, sometimes we do need to be told to do better. So if that's you, do better. If you're already doing it, stay in the fight, keep moving, and don't let, this kind of cultural war on who you were created to be prevent you from being what God created you to be. It's so important that men stand up and lead. Thank you for watching. Please do subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Go to YouTube, subscribe there, and a lot of great content there. Good content coming out all of the time. And we're producing other content that I hope will be a help to you, even in the regard of giving you tools that you can use as you lead and as you stand up to be the folks that God created you to be. So thank you for that. Look forward to talking to you next time.